A very warm welcome to the World of Lord Russell podcast talk show. And today's show is The Magic of Monaco, which captures the life of a charismatic, articulate, sophisticated, and intelligent man who has traveled the world as a writer, photographer, and publisher. And in doing so, entertaining the heads of industry to documenting some of the most beautiful destinations in the world. He is best known for his stunning coffee table books, including China the Beautiful, The Magic of Monaco, the title of this show, of course, The Spirit of London for the 2012 Olympics, and the late Queen's Diamond Jubilee. His books, which have sold over 100,000 copies to date, document the history and aesthetic of locations around the world, featuring his writing and mainly his own photography. He has built enviable careers for himself, a blend between good fortune and old-fashioned hard work, which has seen him not only travel the world, but rub shoulders, I should say, with legends along the way. Now he is looking to turn his experiences towards something that will not only commemorate, but inspire real change. Also, an avid reader of his books is King Charles III. Yes, folks, it gives me an immense pleasure to welcome on the show Anthony Osmond-Evans. Welcome to the show, Anthony.
Hello there. Hello.
Hello indeed. And such a pleasure to have you on the show. It really is. And of course, the best part, the place to start, is of course at the very, very beginning of your fabulous life. You were fortunate to spend 5 years at Tonbridge, where the desire to succeed was instilled within you. Tell us more about these early days of your life, Anthony.
Well, the school itself was founded nearly 500 years ago and known as a public school, although that in fact means private, one of those strange anomalies, and thrown in as a novi or a brand new boarder there. And I didn't really quite know what to expect, but soon settled down. There were other boys, it's a boys' school, and we settled down to rugby and the sort of things that boys do. It's very sporty orientated.
Fabulous.
And in fact, one of our old boys, a young old boy, Zach Crawley, got 60 runs in the Test match from India. Garage. And right, it's all happening. He's gone. And
Is that hello?
hello.
Hello. Carry on, Anthony. A bit of a disruption there.
And another one of our youngsters, young old boys, I think he's 23, 24. He got man of the match playing for England at rugby the other weekend.
Wow. Wonderful. So a truly famous school.
Not to escape, of course, academia. We were very strong on learning all types of things, from science to classical and so on.
Tell him we've lost him.
No, I've got him, Mummy. Yeah.
Carry on, Anthony. Yes, a good story.
And so 5 years there with exeats. We went home to the parents. And in those days, we had caning by the prefects. It's been abolished now.
Oh, dear.
Kept us in line a bit. I don't think they were too sadistic, although I did go home one weekend and showed my mother my pajamas, which had got blood streaks on them because the old cane had whipped me a bit too much. But you learn to behave yourself.
You certainly do indeed. You certainly do. Back in those days, that is for sure, Anthony. And of course, you were just 8 years old when your grandmother gave you a Kodak box Brownie for your birthday, which you used to your advantage at Tonbridge, which had a darkroom. Your passion for photography had begun.
Yes, absolutely. And I think learning really from the very bottom of things about dark rooms, light, the value of light all the time when taking photographs was instilled in me there, and I'm very grateful for it.
It's fantastic. Your great hero at the time was Henry Cartier-Bresson, whose images were all about capturing the moment. And Henry did quote, if I'm right, "If it grabs me, I grab it." all of which captivated you to enter the world of photography and book publishing. That's some inspiration, Anthony, isn't it?
Yes, yes, and his words are extremely true.
Smile.
My partner's daughter just photographed in a tree near a kookaburra, and
Wow.
there's only one, I think, at the moment around in England, because they come over from Australia. But she just happened to be there, happened to spot it, took the picture, and it's come out in one of the papers in East Anglia. But she has that ability to snap the moment. And
Wow.
I'm not sure it's exactly God-given. One uses that parallel, but somebody gives you that ability just to snap
two
it.
kookaburras in England.
Yes.
Yes, a wonderful story. Very wonderful story. Because kookaburras are all more Australian, aren't they? They're sort of, I remember seeing them when I was in Australia a couple of times, the kookaburras. Don't normally get them here in the UK, but
Quite a pretty bird, actually, but strong.
yes,
Very few.
large and strong. Absolutely.
Only 2 or 3 in the UK.
Yes.
You say that.
I mean, surprisingly, your career didn't begin in publishing or photography or indeed writing. In your 20s, you cut your professional teeth by marketing whiskey for the Distillers Group in Hong Kong, a venture that saw you stationed for a time in Hong Kong. A very interesting start in professional life, Anthony. I mean, please tell us more.
Well, I'd actually originally started out as an accountant with the then company called Pete Mitchell, now KPMG as it's grown. But we had 900 staff in the head of London, which was big. Now I think they've got several 100,000 around the world. And it was a good training. You learn tricks of the trade of accountancy, stood me in reasonable stead. But I'd then become a marketing man. I moved into a marketing company in office equipment, and I made a lot of money. I had a big sale to British Telecom, and in those days I had a check in 1964 for nearly £10,000. I mean, it's a lot of money today, but it's a hell of a lot then.
Certainly was.
And with the sort of spirit of adventure, if you like, I set sail to Hong Kong, which was a very far-flung outpost as far as I considered. And I said goodbye to my mother and father on the docks at Southampton. The first class trip out there. It was 42 days. Captain Reed was the captain. SS Cathay, 22,000 tons, and it stopped at great spots all the way out, totally unknown to me beforehand. Cape Town, Singapore, Kuala Lumpur, and then eventually into Hong Kong. And it was very exciting. There was crossing the Meridian line, lots of photography, some very attractive ladies on the way out.
Of course.
And then I arrived in Hong Kong, and the next day marched up to the governor's office in Government House, who was an old Tonbridgian, Sir David Trent, and said, "I'm a young old Tonbridgian, sir. My dear chap," he said, "we'll find you somewhere to stay," which they did. And they found me a job with the whiskey company, as you mentioned. And so life started there, marketing whiskey. We had Johnny Walker, which was a brand out there. And we sold it in Singapore, Malaysia, and Japan. And that was the start of life as I knew it out there. There was lots of fun and games. I'd left a very pretty girl in London when I left for Hong Kong, and everywhere I went on the way round, there was 12-page letter from her. No internet in those days. I asked her to marry me, and by telephone, and she said yes. So I went back to London, and she came out as a married a young bride, and we settled down as a a couple in Hong Kong for a few years.
A wonderful experience. And dare I say, a lucky lady, or should I say a lucky man, Anthony, about having a pretty lady in your life.
Well, there's been one or two, but none more. Current lady at the moment, Sylvia.
Of course, of course, of course. How can we dare say any differently to that? And of course, after working for the Distillers Group, you set up your own marketing company called, I believe, Good Connections. And
Yeah.
Good Connections served as a networking third party, receiving advances from a pool of companies with which to wine and dine the heads of industry and promote these clients' services, plus advising bigwigs. I use that term, so I know you do too, Anthony, in industry. This all sounds extremely interesting, Anthony. Tell us more.
Well, basically, they get up like anybody in the morning, go to the loo. If you sort of remember that, they're the same as many ways, except they are heads of the companies. And I didn't feel superior to them, of course not, but nor under them either. I was able to stand my own ground, talk sense. And in order to get my books made, they were very expensive. Berlusconi, the Italian premier, owned a company called Mondadori in Italy, which was in those days a very wonderful printing house and very expensive paper. And they cost a hell of a lot to produce. And I used to persuade companies, the head of them, to order 2 or 3 or 5,000, or one case 20,000 books, in order to use them as gifts to their big shareholders, to visiting farmers going to them, and so on. And they got books on India and China, depending where they had outposts, because most of them were based in London. Now, in order to meet these people, and remember, most of them are then about 20 years older than me, I used to stay in Delhi at a hotel which was owned by the Ratan Tata and the Tata Group, huge group. And there were two parts to it. There was the old pavilion-like style, if you like, just 4 floors with huge suites and bathtub and so on, and maids coming and going. And then built alongside it was a tower block with, I suppose, about 20 floors on it. All the top bigwigs stayed in the pavilion. It's much more expensive. And in the mornings, at 7 o'clock, I was in the lift going downstairs, as were they. Life started at 7 o'clock, and bigwigs got up early in India before the heat built up. As I went down, I said to whoever, "Oh, when were you at Eton?" or Harrow, or "Oh, member of the MCC," or some tie on which I recognized and was able to sort of break in on a conversation note. And they said, oh, yes, yes, yes. And when they went back up, I was still in the lift. So I stayed there between 7 o'clock to 9 o'clock. And I made a point of sort of thrusting a card in them and said, "Must see you back in London." They said, "Well, yes, yes, why not?" Not really meaning or thinking I'd ever call them, of course. Well, I did. And I would then go and see them in London, explain what I do, show them a previous book I'd done and say, "Can I have 5, 10, 15, 20,000 pounds, whatever's needed, and I'll give you anything from 500 to 5,000 books." And it worked. And I got in total something like 500 or 600 sponsors for my several books. We all won. They won because they had some, if I may say so, some outstandingly lovely books. And I made
For their clients.
a good deal of money out of it.
Absolutely. And of course, Tata I know very well as well. So I've actually done some work for Tata over the years.
Yes.
Tata Consulting, big consulting group, Indian
And
consulting group.
they own the steel works down in Wales, where there's own problems at the moment.
Yeah, they do. They do indeed.
Huge.
And it was
Ratan still alive, I think. He's about 90, head of the dynasty. Very nice man. I remember rightly, I'm not quite sure. I think he's a Zoroastrian, which is one sect of. There used to be. There's about 1,000 that have gone to India. There used to be out in, I think it was Persia, and they were ostracized, but they believed in fire, something
Mm,
like that. And they collectively, most of them have done extremely well, and they're very good living people. I've got a friend who's one of the senior guys at Hong Kong Bank, and they care passionately for their fellow man.
they do indeed.
That's a
Yeah.
sect.
A wonderful story. It was through these contacts that you made with good connections that promoted your life to take an unexpected turn. And the skills you had learnt would start to enable the dream that was cooking away at the back of your mind. And with this, the first person to commission a book was Sir John Baker, my namesake, of course, who headed National Power at the time. And that's some story, Anthony, as well, isn't it? With Sir John
Yes, well,
Baker.
I'd been in the lift.
For
Uh,
2 hours.
he didn't know that, but
Brilliant.
he's having his breakfast. But I did see him back in London. We got on, but that's
Mm.
half the battle. I found out he was a cricketing nut, and I've been a member of the MCC for nearly half a century, and just renewed my subscription this morning, actually. And
Wonderful.
I get a special old farts, if you like, rate. And but lovely people used to turn up in the library, looking out there from the pavilion. People like Peter O'Toole, who's
Oh, yes. Great
very
actor.
huge, very long. He often used to go to sleep, as we all did in the afternoon. But John Baker, and I used to take him off, and he was passionate about opera and very erudite man. And I took him to Glyndebourne and to the Royal Opera House with his wife and so on. It was quite expensive to him, but it was chicken feed in comparison to what I got back from National Power in terms of sponsoring my book. But they used it to big advantage because National Power was the breakaway of the old electricity industry, which became Power Gen, National Power, and the National Grid, three companies, all
Right.
set went public and became shareholders and so on. So they were doing a lot of PR for themselves to promote, to jack up the share price, and of course to make money. Each of them responsible for their own companies.
What a wonderful story. And of course, National Grid, I actually do some consulting work for them these days as well. So
Yes.
interesting business. It
Hmm.
was it was Hong Kong where you contracted the travel bug, a fever that would grow for some years before it would take you back to Chinese shores, of course. You said, and I quote again, Anthony, I hope I've got this right. I got my first taste of China, and I knew that one day I'd have to go back there and photograph it. You also stated, I didn't know when or how or why, but it had been in my mind from those early days. I mean, can you please reveal more, Andrew, about your desire for China? You've been there and had some great fun there, haven't you?
Yes. Um, I'm a great admirer, certainly of the old Chinese, as
Mm,
what back to Confucian times, and that type of philosophy, Confucian philosophy. And I'm a huge admirer of their work with pottery and glazing and attention to detail with woodwork and snuff bottles and so on. And
yes.
they're very industrious, very hard working out in the fields and so on in those days. Of course, it's a very different China today under President Xi and the team around him. But then, just going back to 1983, 1984, I went across the Himalayas, finished up at the base camp. I went into Bhutan, more of that in a moment.
Yes, of
And
course.
when I got into China itself, I spent several months up and down to it's a huge place, of course, and photographing at will and at random. But I was woken up one morning by a noise outside my hotel in southern China. And I noticed that the village, small village, was turning up in the sports field near the hotel, which I could see from my window. And lining up were the army, and standing there with their placards around their necks saying they'd be bad guys were 10 prisoners, all about to be shot, as I found out. And in China in that year, they executed 10,000 people.
Huge amount.
Huge. They were just judged summarily as bad guys, many murderers, some of them just for GBH and so on. And I photographed them before they were off round the back and shot in the head. And that particular picture, called Death in the Morning, Messe du Matin, came out in Paris Match because I sent it to the editor all over the world that particular summer. And it's a double-page spread, and I got the picture. Now, one of my chums, who by then went on later to become head of Marks and Spencer's and also deputy head of Diageo Distillers, as it became, said the reason he didn't believe I'd taken me because he couldn't remember me getting up at 6:30 in the morning.
Very good.
Bulldog, but whose son right now is head of Curry's, very bright lad. And but I took the picture. But I did find out later that the family of the guys who were shot was sent a bill for the cost of the bullet, which is kind of macabre.
Very macabre, and I think that's about $1, wasn't it, for a bullet, I believe, in those days?
Something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's an incredible story. And just for the listeners as well, Paris Match, just to talk about what they are, Paris Match is a French language weekly news magazine which covers major national and international news, along with celebrity lifestyle features, yourself, Anthony. Paris Match has been considered one of the world's best outlets for photojournalism. So that's a huge, huge publication for your wonderful picture, Mort du Matin, to reside in and be seen by all these people around the world. It's fascinating, isn't it?
And on the outside cover was Caroline of Monaco on the title cover page. To me later on. So life comes round in sort of circles, if you like. I mean, my good lady, who's a world expert in classical dressage, which is Portugal, with her then husband, who died older than her. We find that her daughter now has picked up mother's ability to ride and is going to have published for the first time a book, a children's book with the most beautiful illustrations.
Oh, wow.
The publishing house has lapped it up like crazy. And I'm not going to mention who it is, but somebody extremely famous, is a national treasure almost, has written us absolutely wonderful, glowing appraisal. And I've known her not so well. My good lady knows her well through, and the connection bit, you just come round in circles and find out that you've met so-and-so, that's met so-and-so, and so on. And as my company, Good Connections, I guess still connecting, really, can't help myself.
Oh, absolutely. Knowing you as I do, I can quite believe that, Anthony. I really can. And of course, not getting back to connections, your friendship with Sir John Baker, along with the creation of the coffee table book National Lights, inspired you to create your first personal project and book, China the Beautiful, which came a reality in 1995.
Yes.
Stunning book.
Yes. And that was interesting. I'll go back to Bhutan in a moment. There's an amusing tale there. But the China one was exciting because I'd by then become really quite a good friend, without not being best buddy pals, with my local MP, because I was living in the Cotswolds then. A well-known man who was Foreign Secretary called Douglas Hurd, now Lord Hurd of Westwell, and I believe he's still alive, nearly 90, I think. But he was a proper politician, and I'll leave my remark at that because I don't want to castigate too heavily the people in power at the moment. But
indeed,
they're not quite the same as they once were. Let's leave it. But
You
he,
haven't got to convince me, Anthony. I completely understand and respect your view there because I have the same sort of opinions, to be quite honest. But you later presented China the Beautiful, didn't you, at a banquet you hosted in
yes,
Beijing
well,
for top Chinese politicians?
that is, uh, Douglas had asked Edward Heath, who had retired then from Prime Minister, to write the foreword to the book, which he did. And Colin Marshall, then the head of British Airways, who had a lot of books from me, flew 12 of us our first class return to China. My mother, my two daughters, my father had died by then. And I gave a banquet for about 100 people with most of the top bigwigs of the Chinese government and so on. And Heath gave the address. And the English ambassador out there, Sir Len Appleyard,
Mm.
his wife. Now, my daughter had been to a pretty good school in Winchester called St. Swithin's, and she couldn't imagine in her wildest dreams traveling 6,000 miles or more to Beijing to find she was greeted by her ex-headmistress, who had been Lady Appleyard.
Wow, what a story.
And I think Nicola was probably not the most golden girl at school, quite naughty perhaps. And so they fond memories. Headmistress Miss Davis as was. What was interesting, or quite interesting, was that in the papers that weekend before we went out, Len Appleyard had a fairly big drubbing down in the national press because of what he'd been up to in one of the rooms during the remembrance at the cenotaph.
Oh dear.
I won't go into it on the
Very
now.
Sounds like an interesting story. Perhaps one not to feature on the show as it's such, if it's
Pretty interesting. Of course, the records are there. And
they
I,
are.
on the way out, should I mention? He said, under no circumstances.
We better not probe that one much more then, Anthony, had
Drawn
we?
a veil on that. Drawn a veil.
Absolutely. But you've also had several explorations to remote areas, always with an eye to a good photograph, of course. These amazing moments in your life include the Himalayas, the Everest base camp, Tibetan plateau in Tibet, and of course, you've mentioned earlier Bhutan. Now, the moments here are inspirational, so please tell us more, including a nice little story about the king of Bhutan, who had four wives, who were all sisters, who explained a very intriguing fact. Wonderful story.
Well, Bhutan is still very remote and
Mm.
has chosen not to advance too heavily into the ways of technology and so on. And the people there live in a very pleasing way. It's an interesting climate. It gets quite nippy, cold, snow in the winter, but the summer for a few months, lovely climate, fresh air.
Yes.
And they have a thing about the phallus, and most of the houses, which are whitewashed, have very tall 6-foot painted phalli on the doorways and things, because they believe it's a pretty fertile type of picture to put up, which of course it is. It's not sort of vulgar or rude, it's just expressive somehow.
Yes.
But anyway, I'd gone to have lunch with the king, and he had his four wives with him. Now, they were all sisters, and there was a fifth sister who he hadn't married, and I guess she must have felt a little left out. But anyway, and during the lunch, they were all chatting away, and King said to me, he said, they gang up on me, the four sisters. I can't keep a bit fed up. And I said, well, sir, there is one bit of good news. And he said, oh, well, well, what's that? I said, you've only got one mother-in-law. So he thought that was really rather amusing, offered me another glass of wine. And
Absolutely.
that was that. But in respect of Douglas Hurd, at the time, 1993, we were now just 4 years away from ceding Hong Kong back to China.
Mm.
Now, island was never going to go back as such, but he was wholly dependent on fresh water because they didn't have big sanitation plants there. Not sanitation, big desalination plants.
Mm.
And so, in effect, Hong Kong Island couldn't exist without Kowloon, and Kowloon was then going back to China in '97 when Chris Patton, the governor, handed it back. I think there'd been something like 180 or 200 years since we originally leased it.
Correct.
And I got quite friendly with the Chinese ambassadors, friendly as one can get as an outsider, if you like. Very nice man called Mr. Ma. And they don't have sirs and dukes and that sort of thing in China. You're Mr. But he was a very nice man and a wife that didn't speak a word of English. They'd been in America together. He was fluent. But for once, and you've heard me chatting on here, a bit loquacious I am, but at that dinner, I set it up so that we went to the Chinese ambassador's private home in Hampstead, and I took Douglas and his wife along to the dinner. And my then wife had come from New Zealand. And for some reason, the word cannibal came out. And I piped up. I said, did you hear the story of the two missionaries in the pot bubbling away and the cannibals going all around the pot? And Douglas, who had sort of pebble glasses, eyes started to roll. His wife knew it was going to be a terrible joke and started laughing. I hadn't even told it. And my missus is kicking me under the table, whispering, shut up, you know. And we'd had a lovely meal. No private secretaries were allowed in. It was just the six of us. They'd even flown a chef out from Hong Kong, from China. And we started off with lark's tongues, which were actually delicious. A wonderful banquet. But anyway, cannibals. So I said the two head missionaries, one of them said to the head of the cannibals in Swahili or whatever, you can't boil us. The head cannibal said, why not? He said, because we're friars. Douglas now goes quite loony. His eyes start rolling.
I can imagine.
Judy falls on the floor, is giggling. Wife is kicking me like mad. You may not believe it, but it gets worse.
Oh, I can believe it. I can.
The Chinese ambassador, like most Chinese, can't pronounce their R's. So he was saying to his wife, who didn't understand what it's all about, not boilers, flyers, flyers. And of course, absolute panic gets in everywhere. Wife is beating me on the chest. Judy can't get up at all, and Douglas' eyes are going around like a whirligig. And I remember some months later, he'd invited me down to have lunch with the Japanese ambassador, Chevening, which is the foreign secretary's country home near Sevenoaks, near Tonbridge.
Mm.
And I said, Douglas, do you remember that story about the cannibals? He said, never forget it, he said.
What a great story.
Very good friend to me and helped me on a number of occasions, too numerous perhaps to mention now. But he's a lovely man, and I can't be grateful enough to him because he really did help me enormously.
Fabulous.
Without having to, and I actually got a wonderful photograph of him in his office, in the Foreign Office, huge office, got a shower and everything in it. It's an enormous. And I got a very distinguished looking photograph of him, looking very distinguished. In fact, he invited me to meet up with F.W. de Klerk, you remember the South African who abolished apartheid. And I got a great picture of him and several other people because Douglas he just simply, rang him up and said, let Anthony take, it was very kind of him.
Very kind indeed. Very kind indeed. I mean, one of your more amazing projects is a book with a working title of Heroes. And the subject will be just that 50 heroes, I understand, living around the globe today, photographed and interviewed to produce an inspiring collection of true stories. This new project has been inspired in part by the idea of pluralism and coming together of different cultures and faiths, which is amazing, where differences are celebrated and explored. While speaking with them, you also asked interviewees who their heroes are. Great thing to ask, Anthony, to further expand the narrative and to see who has inspired the actions of these great figures. So, who are these notable individuals and heroes, and their areas of interest around the world?
Well, some of them, alas, have now passed on.
Sadly.
I'm still around, but I had the good fortune to become a member, invited to become a member of the Explorers Club.
Mm,
Fact, I've just had notice of, it's in New York, of course, but it's opening up in Berkeley Square, more or less next door to Annabelle's,
wow.
the Berkeley Square next year. And it's going to have 2 restaurants, a library, a smoking room, and a previous manager of the Ritz Hotel in London is taking over the running of the club. It'll be very, let's use the word comfortable, shall we?
Mm,
But I met people like Buzz Aldrin, who's still alive, who went to the moon, of course, with Neil Armstrong.
indeed.
We've got previous heroes that I haven't met, like Sir Edmund Hillary in Tenzing, first people to the top of Everest. James Cameron, the film director, he went to the bottom of the ocean, the Melanie Trench. And people of that real ilk, and they are, I mean, I've explored and done a few quite interesting things, but I'm not in the same league or caliber of these extraordinary brave men, Captain Scotts of their time.
Yeah, true explorers.
These are very special guys. I'm not sure they're fearless. They must wet their pants sometimes,
I'm sure they do.
but they're incredibly brave, and they reach to extremities. I've had the good fortune to be a little bit involved with Bill Gates, and he is at the moment espousing causes about sustainability. That's first of all in health and mosquitoes, and looking for a better living world on medicines, but also sustainability of crops, certain foods, where we can get more per square inch than they used to because of better production. Very interested in the climate and climate change and so on. And we at the club, at the Explorers Club, are looking at the whole aspect under one umbrella called sustainability. And then that's on the one hand, and then you get the Gaza situation on the other, when they're all blowing each other up in an appalling way. So you've
Yes.
got right hand, you've got one man with his immense wealth trying to do good, genuinely, and he set up a trust called the Melinda and Bill Gates Trust, although they themselves are separated. And he's going about doing very, very good things at the moment. But we are moving, are we not, into extraordinarily difficult times.
We are, sadly.
But that's where the
Sadly, so true.
Explorers Club comes in, because it is discovering and uncovering great truths and truisms and things we have masses to learn.
Indeed.
And it's people like that. Now, they themselves are well funded. A lot of the members are pretty well heeled, but there's always a need for more money as the cost of expeditions and so on. And there's a massive drive by the club at the moment to whip up more explorers that can become members and join and create a wealth fund, so the club will be wealthier than it's ever been in its life beforehand.
Sounds interesting because, like you, I see myself as a bit of an explorer. I do like exploration, but certainly, like yourself, not in the league of these guys. I mean, that is
Yeah.
true exploration, isn't it? Absolutely true.
Yes.
Fabulous.
I
I mean,
mean,
the hero. Sorry, Anthony.
have lunch and crack a joke with the King of Bhutan, but other people have been to Bhutan, other people have been to China. But although I was fortunate to witness the execution, not a pleasant experience.
No.
Because I had to be the right place at the right time, so to speak.
It usually is, to be fair. It usually is. It's a very, very good quote to make. Often happens like that. Or, of course, to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. That can happen too. That's not a good thing, really. But the hero's book forward will even feature the late Mother Teresa, who you had the opportunity to photograph 2 years before she sadly passed away. Whilst
Yes.
Mother Teresa is not one of the 50 living heroes to be included in Heroes, you feature her portrait and write about the very special experience you had listening to her. So please share this very special moment, as I know it was one of the most significant moments in your life.
Yes, that's true. She was a remarkable woman and very tiny, hardly came up to my hip. She was minute.
Yes.
When I went to see her at her home in Calcutta, as it was then called, I went upstairs to her room on her balcony. We sat there in the sun, and she said, "My dear, I don't think I really want a photograph today." Well, I was somewhat disappointed, but if somebody doesn't want a picture taken, take it. And she held my hand between hers for some 40 minutes as she talked. And I remember a great stillness came over me. I was quite consumed by the sheer goodness, if you like, of her and the sheer sincerity of her. And I got up to go because I'll stay my welcome. And as I got up, I said, "Oh, by the way, this may come in helpful, Mother Teresa." And I gave her a check for £1,000.
Mm.
Oh, she said, "About that photograph." Well, now,
Yes.
what had happened was that the sun had gone down behind the back of her building and we were in shadow. And I knew that if I went outside and took my flash, went out to get my flash gear, because I hadn't gone in with it because it was bright sun.
Mm.
I'd break the mold, I'd break the moment. And I just hung on to the camera and prayed and squeezed the button, but I got the picture. Now, some years later, 3 or 4 years later, I was coming back from Jersey, where I was then living, into London, and our plane was late getting in, but we did arrive, and I saw a whole group of about 15, 20 nuns with her headgear on, which two blue bands on it.
Yes.
And I said, "Your Mother Teresa's?" "Yes, yes, yes, we are, yes." And they said, "Mother's coming in any minute." And lo and behold, in she came, and she was being pushed in her wheelchair. And it just so happened I had the photograph of her with me, another bit of good luck, which I
Yes.
to get framed in London. And I unrolled it and gave it to her. "Oh, thank you, dear," she said. And off she went.
What a great story.
Yeah, a lovely story, and jolly good luck, really, for me. Mm.
Absolutely, and a chance in a lifetime for most people at the time, of course. But you had the second meeting too. Oh, it's
Yeah,
outstanding, absolutely
yeah,
outstanding story. I mean, it's just incredible, isn't it? I mean, your association with the former Prime Minister, Sir Edward Heath, of course, was formed through a mutual contact. This was typical of the way in which your history and networking would open doors, Anthony. And once again, once it began, it was a spiraling process. You travelled a lot, you met people, you continue to meet people, and it has had very much a snowball effect. As you know, your networking prowess was also a process aided by membership of key clubs, including, as you've mentioned already, the Marylebone Cricket Club, as we all would understand as the MCC, the famed Explorers Club in New York, which you've mentioned, and Glyndesborne, of course. Networking is key, isn't it, Anthony, in life? Very key.
Yes, yes. And it's not everybody that has the desire. On the one hand, some people like to remain very private, which they're certainly entitled to be. Other people can be a little bit more outré. You have to be careful not to become vulgar with it, or I couldn't help but drop some names this afternoon because you were leading me up that path. And
Absolutely. I'm good at that.
I couldn't say I knew Mr. Smith or Mr. Jones or whatever. It means something if the person's got a name of
Distinction. Yeah, absolutely.
But one has to be careful with that. But on the other hand, they are great hooks. They're great link people themselves. And you do something for somebody that fundamentally, A, you respect, and B, you like. And I think that you can't go around giving every person, woman you meet, a bunch of flowers, anything like that, because that's ridiculous. But they just got to genuinely like you. And there are people out there, I'm sure, who not too keen on me for some reason or another, which they're entitled to be. But fortunately, there's enough people out there who think well enough of me to have helped me with the books. And I've got another book lined up at the moment to celebrate the Queen's passing, because she had a wonderful lifetime. And I've got a number of pictures, few that I've taken and some I've collected from other people, which I hope to do. But I'm not getting any younger, and it's getting harder to get funds from people, and it's getting harder to get to meet the heads of industry now, because they tend to be in their 40s, and I don't quite know what to say to youngsters of 40. They don't quite know what to say to me. So what used to be good meeting points, connection points, are no longer quite the same as they were. So that might be a book that I don't exactly get round to finish, but I hope so.
Well, I hope you do too, because I believe it's called 70 Glorious Years. Its production, I understand, was delayed by the pandemic too, but it will be published in September 2024, this year. I mean, this book celebrates the late Queen's Platinum Jubilee in 2022, doesn't it? Extraordinary book.
Yes. And
congratulations.
I took a unique picture, again with the help of Douglas. I keep returning to him. I stood on top of my lawyers on the South Bank when the regatta, the Jubilee regatta, went down the Thames, 1,000 boats.
Yes.
And my lawyers were bang opposite the Tower of London. And I'm the only person on the roof there, and I've got help from Douglas getting through security and everything, because I had a big telephoto lens that looks a bit like a bazooka, which I'm letting you through with then, because security was immense at that time.
Could have alarmed a few people, couldn't it, if it's what a bazooka was about to be let off on the top of this building.
Person on top of this roof, and I was the only person to have got the picture that I did.
Wonderful.
I auctioned it in the Tower of London.
It's a White Tower, wasn't it? I think you did it in the White Tower in the Tower of London. Yeah. Special auction.
General Dannett was there, and I gave the proceeds, not quite as much I'd like to have done, because the cost of putting the banquet on became very expensive.
Yes.
But a number of people around who were pretty well heeled. One of them, his father had left her the Rockefeller Center as somewhere to look after pension, you know, the whole of the Rockefeller Center.
Wow. And I believe you raised around £14,000 for that one photograph for
Yes,
Help the Heroes charity. That's incredible, isn't it?
yes. And looking back, perhaps I might have wanted to go. And I'm having another print made. That was only one.
Mm.
Another one made slightly bigger size, but I'm keeping just a limited edition of one of one size and one of another. So
Yes.
I'm pretty rare and special and unique. And I'm going to try and have a bigger auction of it. In fact, I was with the framers this morning discussing exactly how it should look. And it does look wonderful with the Tower of London as the backdrop and the flotilla going down. And at the head of it is Sir Geoffrey Sterling, Lord Sterling, as well, used to be head of PM. And it makes a very colourful, wonderful setting. And I think in my picture, maybe 20 or 30 boats or so on, out of 1,000, but they're all coming down the Thames behind them, made a wonderful procession. Not the best of days. It was raining a bit. But I mean, it wasn't absolutely bucketing with rain. But the picture looks, it's unique
Yes.
anyway.
That's fantastic. In fact, even the rain might have just given that picture just a little bit of something special too. And as a great photographer you are, I'm sure you made the best moment. I'm sure you did.
Yeah.
I mean, we first met Anthony in March 2022 at the Walks, the home of Kings Lynn Town Football Club. There's always a bit of sport in my programmes. And
Yeah.
both Sylvia, your good self, and yours truly, being mutual friends of Stephen Cleeve, the chairman. You did purchase my autobiography and you promised to get back to me on the Tuesday with your review. And a glorious review it was too, so thank you very much for that. But one thing that stands out in my mind whilst you were living in Monaco, south of France, is a fabulous story with your good friend, Dame Shirley Bassey, all to do with the title of my autobiography, My Way. You knew this was coming, I'm sure you did. So please enlighten us all. Great
Well,
story.
I had the good fortune to, again, good fortune to meet up with Prince Albert, and I went to see him in the Ritz Hotel with his aide-de-camp, and he'd heard and seen about my books. He said, "I'd like you to do a book on Monaco." So I said, "Fine, love to." And he put me up some of the time down there in a lovely little Bijou hotel, which had been a one-star Michelin, a Roquebrune just outside Monaco.
Mm.
And he signed a letter from him, and it meant that every door in the Principality was open. Wherever I wanted to go, he'd signed it, and I just took it round with me. And so I got a really nice collection of pictures. It's a great place to photograph because so much going on. It's all.
Indeed.
But I think that, and then I later took down Sylvia, my good lady, who I met in 2016 in London. We've got a mutual friend called Rose Foyle for Foyle's Bookshops, which leads me on to the Shirley Bassey story in a moment. And she was giving this cocktail party in London at her flat, and I spotted Sylvia with distance. They were chatting away, and as I was getting ready to go, Sylvia came up, had a couple of drinks, why not? And you know, what did you say, darling?
I said, I can't remember.
You're very attractive, and
Something like that.
something like that. And I thought, hey, that's good news. So I invited her out for dinner, which unfortunately I had to cancel because I caught a cold. But she said, come down on Boxing Day. I'm giving a party down where I am in Suffolk with her.
Suffolk.
And I hardly left. I was living down in France at that time.
Yes.
But back 3 months later, and that was that. But she's been a great supporter and help to me. She writes beautifully herself. She's done some 8 books on riding. She's got a following of 18,000 on Facebook.
Mm.
She's taught and is recognized throughout the world because of her love, ability, and skill at classical dressage.
Mm.
And I took her down to Monaco, very well received, met up with the prince and so on. But the story of Shirley Bassey took place, I can't remember exactly when, but something like about 2010, 2011. And invited to come and have dinner, and with Christopher Foyle, who had inherited the bookshop, died 2 years ago. And she'd had a few drinks, had Shirley. The Sixers, a quiet dinner, this lovely little restaurant. And we finished up at 11 o'clock at night with her sitting on my knees singing I Did It My Way. And as you know, she can bellow with the best. And
She can.
we and I got quite a good baritone voice, and we raised the roof that night. But
Yes, bellowing with yourself, Anthony Osmond-Evans, while sat on your knee. That's a great story, isn't it?
it was quite fun. Yes, yes. I've been lucky, but you make your luck a bit. You've got to take advantage if it's there. And I don't think those that miss the chances, it was up to them at the time, wasn't it? Or
It was.
maybe they don't see the chance either.
Quite
Um,
possibly so.
I couldn't be too definitive about it, but I've been lucky.
Yes, and so it can be said, Anthony, as well, that your Tonbridge days gave you the confidence to correspond with such luminaries as King Charles III, Bill Gates, you've mentioned earlier, and of course Professor James Rowe at Cambridge. All
Yes.
are concerned, as indeed you are, alongside the Explorers Club, with the sustainability of the world. I mean, it's becoming a problem, isn't it, in the world at the moment?
Terrible.
Hugely. And I think that something I wrote for my old school, who wanted a potted version of my activities, much the same as I've been talking to you today on, are, and looking at the world today, particularly with accent down in Gaza and Israel
Indeed.
and the Ukraine and the awful
Russia.
Putin. In a way, I was very taken with the story, a true story of a toreador in Spain who, in the middle of the bullfight, went to the edge of the ring and squatted down against the balustrade round there, the ring.
Yes.
And there's a picture of him with the bull no more than a foot away from him, the horned bull. And the toreador says and writes about it, do you know, I looked into the bull's eyes, and he was saying to me, and he was praying to his God, I don't want to fight you. Please don't kill me.
Mm.
And the toreador got up, left the ring, and never returned to the ring again.
It's
And
some story.
I think that's a hell of a story.
It is. It
You
is.
don't find. Einstein said, you know, the trouble is with war, it doesn't bring peace.
No, it
And
doesn't.
terrified at what he'd started or created with the bomb. But force begets force, and it
Yes.
just goes on, and then revenge, and revenge comes back on itself. It's very easy to sit here and be philosophical, you know, in the depths of the lovely Suffolk countryside with the daffodils
Mm.
up and the flowers, the cherry blossom ahead of its time coming up, our moats full up. The ducks have just returned, Mr. and Mrs. Duck, and they'll lay their young. And you know, spring is starting up
It
again.
is indeed, thankfully.
very easy and very lucky to be sitting here with the lovely Sylvia.
Of course.
It's my home.
Yes,
Your home. I mean,
indeed.
quite right. And, I'll mention a bit more about that in a minute, but Prince Charles, we've got to talk about this as well. Prince Charles at the time did send you a personal letter too, enthusiastically praising your books. An avid reader, and I'm sure today as King Charles III too. That's lovely, isn't it?
Well, he
Yep.
sent her. I had my 80th the other day, and I'd invited him and the Queen along. He couldn't make it, but he sent me a letter the other day saying sorry that they couldn't make the 80th, wished me well on it all, and particularly would like to say hello to Sylvia, because I think they know each other vaguely from
The question.
Question. Yeah,
Yeah.
not close buddies.
And I was
but-
decorated.
oh
Queen.
yes,
Oh,
yes.
of course. Lovely story there, Sylvia, too.
In Portugal, where
Mm.
she has extolled and brought to bear over here and elsewhere the Lusitano horses, which are specially trained in Portugal to work in the with their cleverness and nimbleness of the feet in the bull ring, where they don't kill the bull in the ring, they take it outside. But nonetheless, the
They
toreadors
do
they
all
have to
the
be very adroit,
gymnastics
the
and-
gymnastics of it all, which
Yes.
is forte.
And of course, another reason for King Charles, just say King Charles III, for probably not attending your invitation was because King Charles III himself is in not so great health too at the moment, as we know, but we don't want to talk too much or elaborate on that. So that could be another reason, he's got other more important things to think about, I guess.
And I wouldn't presume upon him either.
No, indeed. Absolutely not. I mean, we do have a very rich list of big wigs. I've used that term again because I know you famously use it quite a bit. And the famous as part of your contacts through world travel. A superb old boys network to be proud of, isn't it? It's worked well for you in your life, your rich life.
I guess, yeah.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Of course, today, and you mentioned it earlier on, you live in Suffolk with your girlfriend, Sylvia Locke, the world's leading author on dressage, as you mentioned earlier on as well, where you cohabit with a host of horses, dogs, barn owls, hedgehogs, ducks now, of course, you just mentioned, and I understand a rather luscious vegetable garden too. I understand it's an enviable idyllic setting, and whilst you and Sylvia, who I have met, of course, before at Kingsland Town Football Club, focus on different topic areas as writers, the mixing of creative minds allows you both to spark ideas off one another and keep each other motivated. I mean, it sounds like a perfect life, Anthony, doesn't it, Sylvia?
Yes.
You
Sylvia
put it,
answered first. Absolutely well done, Sylvia. It's just such motivation.
you put it very well. It does motivate. That doesn't mean to say we agree about everything. Does have the odd row or squabble
No.
about one thing or another, but we get on pretty damn well most of the time,
That's good to hear.
I must say. But um, uh, I was going to say something. You sparked. I've forgotten. It'll come back.
It'll come back to you whilst you're remembering. I was just going to say you have quite a strong humanitarian streak too, Anthony, and you have been quoted as saying, and I quote, hope it's right, I was a bit Bertie Wooster growing up. I turn up in these countries in a Panama hat and a nicely cut Savile Row suit and so on. But life isn't like that. It's rough. I've been lucky. But for a great deal of the world, it's tough, as we mentioned earlier on in the show, too. I mean, it's a very true statement, Anthony, but, a great style, too, isn't it? Panama hat, Savile Row suit, wonderful.
Where I said that or wrote that, but it's what I feel, and I don't exactly remember when I did that, but that is a very true way that I have thought. It's very precise, very exact.
Excellent. So what's next in the world of Anthony Osmond-Evans? What's next? What's happening tomorrow, apart from your new book, of course, which is hopefully going to be released in September 2024 this year? Any other plans?
Well, it's quite interesting. come across a chap, or he's come across me, who I think probably knows even more people than I do, one way or another.
Wow, can't be possible.
But he tends to ring up every so often, like about 3 or 4 times a week, actually. And do I know somebody that wants to buy boots? Chemist shop. Do I know somebody that wants to sell a vineyard?
Oh, this
Um,
sounds like our mutual friend, Lawrence Perry.
and he's quite extraordinary, isn't he?
Yes, yeah, very interesting character. It has a rich array of people contacts. He always says to me, actually, Russell, I know everybody, but if by chance there is somebody I don't know, I know somebody that does know them.
That's right. And
Wonderful.
he's got good ability to throw, well, like throwing darts at a dartboard. One of them sticks
Mm,
somewhere. And his ability to identify what's wanted and who might be able to provide it, it's very good. It doesn't, you don't win them all or so
no,
on.
you don't.
He's quite egalitarian about it all,
He is.
and think, you know, well of people, and tries, I think, to be effective to humanity's good, I suppose, for want of. I'm being a bit grandiose about that, but
But he is a good man, not like yourself, Anthony. So,
who's
um,
to me, newish. I've been associated with him now for some few months, and we've got a number of things that may well mature. They take a bit of time sometimes.
exactly.
What's the people we link up? We try to get them to actually meet each other rather than just be sitting at the end of the phone, because actually meeting people makes a hell of a difference.
It does indeed. The whites of the eyes.
You
I
can
know he
smell.
lives out of the country now, Lawrence. He's not in the UK, but and it's my fault, by the way. You're getting 3 or 4 calls a week from Anthony, from Lawrence, because I did introduce him to you. So
Yeah,
you can blame me for that one. So,
no,
there
I'm
we are.
pleased you did.
Yes,
I think well of him.
yeah, he's a good man,
Yes,
outstanding gentleman. Actually, to be fair, really good gentleman.
yes.
That's great. So we've been chatting now for an hour. It's been a great chat, hasn't it? It really has. And I have some wonderful conversations and wonderful stories. But I'm always conscious of time. I'm conscious that not to try and step over the hour mark as much as I sometimes do, because listening time is important to people, as you know. Um, but as I always say on the show, as always on the World of Lord Russell podcast talk show, we could talk forever, Anthony, about your life, amazing life in publishing, in fact, and photography. And as a distinguished and revered writer too, your world discovery and friends from the world of film, politics, sport, and beyond is second to none. It's been a huge pleasure as always. And as always, the pleasure is all mine. And of course, the show's audience when this podcast is released on the World of Lord Russell podcast talk show and the YouTube channel, the TV YouTube channel, of course. So thank you, Anthony. Ladies and gentlemen, I always give a bit of an applause here. I'll give you Anthony Osmond-Evans. What an absolute gentleman you are. And of course, your delightful lady, Sylvia, as well, who's participated in part on the show. And lovely to see you, Sylvia, as well. Fantastic. I wish you both all the best for the future. And I'm sure we'll meet up again at some point as well, at some sporting event or the Explorers Club or wherever our paths will cross, but we'll keep in touch.
Opening of the club anyway, but is there anything you wanted to have a quick word with, or indeed a long word with, but with Sylvia herself, because she's been a great supporter to me. There
Absolutely.
might have been a question that's popped up while we were talking.
Yes, indeed. I mean, Sylvia, you have been a great supporter of Anthony. All good, as I always say, it's a very old saying here. Of course, behind every great man, there's even a better or greater woman. How have you? What is your thoughts behind this? Supporting Anthony as you've done, and so it just shows a wonderful relationship between you two, doesn't it? Really, fabulous. What's the secret?
I think because we're both writers, I started writing quite seriously, believe it or not, at about the age of 10.
Yes,
Three children's books. They never got published in those days because I didn't know how to go about that. But I think I've still got them somewhere.
oh,
And
wonderful.
Then I became a serious writer, and I've written 8 books which sell all over the world. They've been translated into German and French, as well as English.
Incredible.
They're very popular, I think, in Australia and America, the USA.
Yes.
And they've given me great pleasure. I adore writing. I mean, that is my thing. At school, the thing I was good at was composition and art. I wasn't
Mm.
interested in anything else.
We all have our favourites, don't we? We do
Yeah.
our topics.
But the
Absolutely.
the riding thing is separate, although it is combined with the writing. The riding thing happened because my father had helped a man who was absolutely broke and had no money at all. And he had 3 horses and he didn't know what to do with them because he couldn't afford to feed them. So my father, being my father, very generous, he was an artist,
Mm.
said, look, bring them over and put them in our field and we'll look after them. And that happened, and that turned into a riding school. And I
Wow.
ended up at the age of 21 with 10 horses, summer camps, children's away days, and got very involved with the whole thing. But it was only because of those 3 ponies,
Wow.
and they weren't particularly good ponies. They were just 3 ponies that needed a home. But it
Absolutely. That's a lovely story, isn't it? That's a beautiful story. And from those 3 ponies, you were born, really, weren't you, in your professional life?
yeah.
Wonderful. It takes
New
things.
coming out on the pipeline? Because once one's done a book, one tends to want another one. What about yourself, Russell?
Yeah. Well, there is talk about doing another book, and I would like to write another one, of course, because I did enjoy my way, and of course, my life is still continuing with lots of experiences, new stories being developed all the time, meeting lots of interesting characters, events, situations in life just can constantly happen in my world. They really do. So yes, I would like to write another book, and I think actually, I might start to do one in a year, maybe 2 years' time. But at the moment, I'm concentrating on the podcast talk show. I'm concentrating on doing films. I've got some potential films that are looking to be produced at the moment as well. And then, yes, get back to doing another book. Why not? I think writing a book's an extremely wonderful thing to do, and it's there forever, isn't it? Memories and moments you don't forget, and you can't get taxed on them. Even better.
Sylvia herself is starting on a novel now. Well, not so much a novel; it's more autobiographical,
Nice.
leaving out certain chapters.
Oh dear.
Portuguese Revolution, centre
Oh
Brownie.
yes, that's right, darling. Yes, she was there at the time, which not many people know about the Portuguese Revolution because it was
Mm,
fairly sotto voce, but it nearly took off in a much worse way than it did
yes.
in 1976,
1974.
74.
Mm.
But there, but for the grace of God.
And nobody's heard of it. I mean, it's quite extraordinary. Hardly anybody knows that there was a very serious, luckily bloodless,
Mm.
revolution in Portugal in 1974. And it was very hard for all of us who were living out there because you couldn't buy food, you couldn't buy, it was really quite tricky.
Yes.
But came through it, thank God. The communists who had started it all were eventually thrown out, and sort of a normal people got back into power
Mm.
again.
Thankfully, because Portugal is a very beautiful country, one of my favourites in Europe.
Quite a tricky time.
Yes,
Russell,
indeed.
Steve Cleve in recent weeks.
I got a message off Stephen Cleve actually the other day. I said, "Oh, look, I'm looking forward to a podcast I've got coming up with Alan Hudson and Anthony Hudson." He said, "Oh, looking forward to that, Russell, because he's a Chelsea fan, as you know, and I did mention about going to a match before the end of the season. So I may meet up before the end of the season at the Walks, or even an away game. Travel with Stephen in his car. He can
Will
drive.
you, if I leave you, because
Yes."
I'll leave it with Anthony.
Lovely to see you, Sylvia. Thank you for joining in. Some wonderful stories, and hopefully we'll meet up again at some stage in the future, near future.
Yeah, I
Russell,
love that.
where
Thank you.
exactly do you live, in fact?
I reside in Swaffham at the moment in Norfolk. So not far from Kingston Town Football Club.
Yes, Swaffham, isn't it?
That's what, sorry, Anthony?
Didn't the Meridian line go through Swaffham?
It does go through Swaffham, indeed it does. Yes, it
Now,
does.
the thing is that I talked to Steve a few months ago. I don't know how it's taken off, but it seems to me that the best thing he can do is to buy out the leasehold or whatever financial structure is needed and sell that land to be developed, because to put in a really nice housing estate, center of town more or less, or at least near to, and then build the stadium out of town, because people will travel to where the stadium is.
It often happens, doesn't it, in new modern stadiums? It often happens.
Because people being there, they're close to the shops and the hospitals and that sort of thing. Whereas those that want to will follow the club out to wherever it is, say a couple of hours, whatever.
I mean,
So
I have heard, Anthony, that there's been some financial restructuring led by Stephen Clee. There are some new investors.
Yeah.
So I hope the club will profit from that, or benefit from that, I should say, particularly on the pitch itself. They have been getting some results recently, but let's see what happens. I'll meet up with Stephen before the end of the season, no doubt.
Well, I think he's got a difficult time on him, and I think trying to get the Airwick and the dog going, but that's, I think, a bit of a slog, I think, for him.
Absolutely.
I've got a feeling that he hasn't quite found his métier yet on what to, because he's got lots of verve and drive and lots of charisma. I think he just needs the right product, which I'm sure he'll make work, but
yes,
it is.
That's it. That's the same with all of us, I guess. You've made yours work. I'm still striving for my my differences in life as well. That's fine. I just find life very interesting, and to try new things and do new things is always a lovely thing to do in life, I believe, as well. So, but stick by your values, of course, as well. Values are very important. I'll certainly meet up with Stephen absolutely before the end of the season. Let's see what happens.
You see him before I do. Give him our best.
I will indeed. I will indeed.
One of these days, anyway. So
absolutely. But do stay on for a little while, Anthony, if you don't mind. I'm just going to close down the show and introduce the next show, because it's a very interesting character. So that would be great. So the next episode on the World of Lord Russell podcast talk show is Sportsmen, Royalty and Politicians, where my special guest will be Paul Trevilion, the much acclaimed artist who produced artwork for publications like Eagle, while still at school, by the way, from the 1960s to the 1980s. Paul designed and illustrated pieces for Daily Mirror, Daily Express, The Sun, the Daily Telegraph, The Times, and TV Century 21. And in 2006, revived the cult football cartoon, You Are the Ref, made famous, of course, by a football magazine, Shoot, in the 1970s. A book collecting 50 years of You Are the Ref was published in October 2006. And from August 2008, You Are the Ref appeared online at guardian.co.uk. Paul also spent much of the 1960s in the US working with Mark McCormack at IMG for some of the world's biggest brands, is the author and illustrator of over 20 books which have sold worldwide. He also illustrated the famous Gary Player golf class, which appeared in over 300 newspapers worldwide. Paul has met and drawn some of the sport's biggest names, including Pele, Bobby Moore, George Best, Franz Beckenbauer, Jack Nicklaus, Tiger Woods, Michael Jordan, Sugar Ray Robinson, and Oscar de la Hoya. As a young man, Paul also met and drew British Prime Minister Winston Churchill. What a story. Wow. So another exciting show to look forward to on the World of Lord Russell podcast talk show, available, of course, on all podcast media platforms and the Lord Russell YouTube TV channel. And of course, I'm looking forward to seeing you all on the inside. So until then, it's au revoir from him and au revoir from me.